And what is unique and profound about this philosophy is because when it comes to the topic of the truth, this philosophy is explicit and straightforward. You are the truth. We are back with another reflection on that Vedantic, that TDV, that daily Vedantic. And today's reflection, it is on, well, what can't be said. This philosophy, the intro episode talks about this. So it's said right up front. And yet it is something that, especially here in the West, we are told over and over again, not only can you not say that, but you should never think that. And that is this phrase: you are the divine. Not you are divine. Not you who you think you are, Scott Thompson or Sarah Jones. No, it's not. Sarah Jones is the divine. But you who you really are, independent of whatever sounds we make out of our mouths.
But you don't say that.
Whatever sounds come out of our parents' mouths when they say, this is you now, James. No. Completely unrelated to that sound that people use to get your attention. Who you really are is the divine, the supreme. What this philosophy says most explicitly, without mincing any words, without avoiding any conflict or ruffling any feathers, what this philosophy says, oldest philosophy we got on this planet, has said for thousands and thousands of years, way before we ever wrote anything down, the oldest philosophical concept is that you are God. The logic behind it is actually quite simple. If God is infinite, there isn't anything that isn't God. Because, well, that wouldn't be infinite. The infinite of infinites doesn't just stop where your skin begins. Everything is divine. But what this philosophy says even more precisely is that all of this out there is a projection of ignorance. The thought that there are things out there, objects out there, environments out there, is a projection. A projection of the mind is the colloquial phrase, but it's more technically a projection of ignorance, of not seeing what really is. That there are no objects. That reality is objectless awareness. It is existence itself, not existence of things, but Sat Chit Ananda, truth or existence, consciousness, bliss. It's like saying, instead of objects like this mug existing, what is and what you are is a priori to anything existing. It is existence itself. Truth itself. This gets us in the fun territory trying to use words to describe reality. Always a losing endeavor. And yet, philosophers, they point. Truth itself, existence itself, consciousness itself, bliss itself, outside of and independent of objects of consciousness or objects or laws within truth itself, existence itself, consciousness itself. Swami will say objectless awareness. So awareness itself. Many different pointers that point to that which cannot be articulated. But this episode is not about that which cannot be articulated. This episode is about that which cannot be said. You are God. Growing up in the Bible Belt in Dallas, Texas, in a very Protestant conservative neighborhood, I almost feel the stones coming my way when I say that phrase. But doesn't their tradition say, ye are gods? It says that in the Old Testament. Christ, his last prayer. The embodiment of God, the idol of worship, especially when we worship that personified version. Out of his own tongue, his own words was, may they be one as you and I are one. Speaking about the disciples, speaking about us, to be one with the Father and with him. St. Athanasius, who oversaw the Council of Nicaea that was deciding which books to go in the Bible, famous phrase, God became man so that man may become God. Christian mystics, the way, Christ saying things like, follow me, not worship me. And Christian mystic tradition that in many ways has since been lost, is built around the perception, the pursuit of the perception of unity in the midst of a misperception of plurality. The direct participation in the divine. These are all words that describe a non-dualistic, unified approach to the divine that has not only been lost in the West, you'd straight up get killed for suggesting it. Or like I said, shunned from my own community in Dallas by perhaps some of my closest neighbors and friends, if they heard me saying outside their doors to a neighbor walking by, to a stranger, or to themselves, you are God. Again, this is not Sarah Jones or James Beshara is God. That's megalomania. Again, this is not saying, and this is a massive misinterpretation of Eastern philosophies in many ways, certainly of Vedanta. The fatal mistake is to think that it's saying Sarah Jones or James Beshara is God. That is megalomania. That is the separation from the divine, is an egoistic inflation. After all, the word for Satan in Islam is shaitan, which means distance. And the Christian realm, the Greek word for Satan, diablos, is thrown apart. It is that separation from God, that egoistic inflation, that is the separation and the root of the illusion. The illusion that we are dualistic and separate. That is the ignorance that this philosophy helps us, encourages us to overcome. And yet still, this phrase in all of its forms is seen as heresy. The modern world we live in. Something you just cannot say. But if history has taught us anything, it's that if you aren't being called a heretic, if you're just going along with the mainstream, if you're going along with what the predominant view in culture says, if you aren't being called a heretic by the mainstream, then you're doing it wrong. Not all heretics are telling the truth. but all those that were and are telling the truth. They all have that in common. What the mainstream calls them. We get close to saying these things, and yet even our brightest leaders shy away from saying it explicitly, even if they believe it themselves. A really famous pastor that our family just happens to know. He is a friend, and he was at our house 8 or 9 months ago. He was talking about that St. Athanasius quote, God became man so that man may become God. One of the oldest quotes within the Christian tradition by one of the preeminent leaders that decided which books were going into the Bible. And yet he said, and most Christians today don't know that phrase, don't know that quote, and can't even look in the direction of that concept because it's so scary and seems so heretical to them. But he told me that when he was at our house several months ago, he told me that he changed it before putting it up for Sunday service to God became man so that man may become like God. Because he felt like the parishioners just couldn't quite handle the correct interpretation of the original quote. And shit, if our stewards, if our spiritual guides think so little of us, to where they're changing quotes, they think we can't handle the truth. That's just a few shades away from shielding us from the truth. That's not shedding light. That's not being a lighthouse. For a parish, for a people, that is actually being a blindfold. And what is unique and profound about this philosophy is because when it comes to the topic of the truth, this philosophy is explicit and straightforward when it says you, who you really are. You are the truth. So not only can you handle the truth, but it is the only thing that will satisfy you. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.